welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rita Cronice, and I am the coordinator of the virtual community of practice for the Academy of Peer Services. As you can see on the screen, this is our web address for the Academy of Peer Services, www.academyofpeerservices.org. When you click that link, or enter that into your browser, you'll come to our Academy of Peer Services homepage. And here you can learn more about the 50 online courses that we provide for the peer support workforce in the state of New York. These courses are not just limited to New York State, but they are funded by the New York State Office of Mental Health for the certification of peer specialists in New York State. Many states are using our online courses for continuing education purposes, and we ask everybody who is interested to just let other people know about us. Our courses are fully online, they're free of charge, and they're available 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during the time that we're open. We do close for a very short period between terms just to make sure that our courses are updated and have the most up-to-date information possible. And we do take a lot of feedback from our users to make sure that we're providing a quality product. Our courses are not just for peer specialists, though. They are for anyone who has a role in the workforce that is delivering peer support services, and that includes supervisors, organizational leaders, and co-workers and colleagues who may just be curious about what peer support is all about and what it is that we're being trained to provide. To enroll, you would just come to our homepage and click the login button at the very top of the page. This will take you to a free registration process where you just enter your contact information so that we know how to reach you. We have phone support and actually online and phone support if you have any questions. So that information is provided on the site when you come. I also wanted to mention, which is my project, the Virtual Community of Practice, which takes it beyond the online learning into the real world of jobs, connection, communication, and collaboration. Our Community of Practice features over 200 new jobs each month in the state of New York. We have a newsletter, we have a calendar of events that are happening, and now in the world as it's changed, there's a lot of online events that are being posted there. We have links to peer warm lines and peer support lines, online peer support groups that are happening now all the time. And we just wanted to call attention to a new resource that's been put out available by the Office of Mental Health, which is an emotional support line. This emotional support line that you see here is fully staffed by peers and volunteers who can reach out to anybody who's having who's in emotional distress during this challenging period of time. So, without further ado, I just want to welcome every one of you to our Faces and Places of Peer Support series. We do a monthly webinar on different organizations and different services that are being provided by peers. And today's is going to be a wonderful presentation, and we're glad you're here to join us.
From Rutgers Department of Psych Rehab and Counseling Professions. So I'm working with Rita, and I'm really pleased to be with all these amazing experts with older adults. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're redefining what older adulthood should be, or we should consider what it might be. Because research really indicates that there is a likelihood of accelerated or rapid aging in people living with mental health conditions. Some reasons may be related to telomere shortening or inflammation, social determinants of health, impacts of medication, or even chronic physical illness. We see illnesses of older adulthood earlier in people with mental health conditions, things like gout, arthritis, COPD, emphysema, etc. And some of my work suggests that physical functioning is also worse for some people with mental health conditions at an earlier age. So we should be talking about aging for people with mental health conditions at earlier ages. As it says on the slide, 45 is the new 70. Next slide, please. I know that most of you know about the 8 dimensions of wellness that Dr. Peggy Swarbrick developed and then SAMHSA has adopted. I'm working on a project now with Peggy to update and propose an age-specific model for wellness for older adults with mental health conditions. So Peggy Swarbrick, Matt Fullen, Carlos Pratt, Nora Barrett, and some other folks are working on this project. And the reason we're looking at this is this idea of developmental wellness, which Matt Fullen came up with. And he thinks about developmental wellness as cultivating a healthy, realistic attitude about the process of growing older. We know that perception of aging is actually linked to longevity. So the more positive we can be about the aging process, it's likely good health and will help us live longer. As we age, we should have the belief that life continues to have value and is worth living. These beliefs could also include realistic perceptions of aging, using imagination to reconceptualize what old aging looks like, and hopefulness, and seeing self as resilient. Those are all sort of the components of developmental wellness. Next slide, please. A great resource is the Taos Institute. Its focus is on the appreciation of aging, and it sees aging as a rich time for personal development and resiliencies. They have a great newsletter you can use to emphasize growth and expansion in aging through social construction. And I believe that this is on your resource page as well. Next slide, please. So some of the approaches and strategies from the literature include incorporating developmental, spiritual, physical, and intellectual wellness into your current practices. Also expanding the use of peer supports for older adults. There are a few examples, and we're going to hear about some of them today, but there aren't enough, I think, in my opinion. Also to include a person's preferred supporters into discussions of care and things that they'd like to do. Asking the older adult about their wants and needs. Noticing cognitive abilities. Sudden changes in older adulthood in cognition or thinking may mean urgent medical care is needed. Also identify opportunities for self-management of health challenges like diabetes. And also to attend to aging issues such as end-of-life issues, housing transitions, grief, and life review. Next slide, please. So I've worked with Peggy's model of wellness for about 12 years or so, and I really find strengths from it. But I think we should consider how wellness might be different for older adulthood, and also to consider which areas are more or less important for each individual. Also, being aware of our culture and cohort is important. So for example, the way I think about wellness is probably different than the way my father or my grandfather, who is 95. Being aware of what the people that you help, what their sense of wellness looks like from their growing up time is also very important. Next slide, please. When we look at wellness in older adults, I think we should also think about the sense of positive aging that it's about, feeling satisfied with life. having control over life decisions, engaging in meaningful activities, and living in a setting to promote optimal life. Next slide, please. I'd like to leave you with some rhetorical questions here, which I think the other presenters are going to do a great job of addressing. To be able to think about the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that you need in order to effectively work with older adults. Part of that becomes from knowing yourself. And I really encourage you later to try the Who Aging Attitudes questionnaire, because you should explore your own perspective on aging, because our own views may influence how we help others. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Clinton. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I think that's a great transition, talking about from some of the aspects of wellness and what wellness looks like for older adults, to how we can look at strengths. So this clip here, this slide here talks about many doctors aspire to excellence in diagnosing disease. Far fewer, unfortunately, aspire to the same standards of excellence in diagnosing what patients want. So in the shared decision-making training that we do at the coalition, what the statistics say is that there is a gap between what doctors and physicians believe that their patients want, or the outcomes that they're looking for, versus the outcomes that the actual patients want. And unfortunately, I also think that's true in our mental health field, in that kind of what we look at as desired outcomes, especially for older adults, may not necessarily be the outcomes or the life that they want, because those things may be shifting or changing depending where an individual is in their life. Next slide, please. So traditionally, the list on the left is traditionally a lot of the goals that I've seen on plans and have heard about. Compliance with treatment, psychiatric stability, gaining increased insight into illness, medication adherence, wanting decreased hospitalizations, residential stability, improved judgment, improved functioning, and improved socialization. None of those goals in and of themselves are wrong. What I'm going to say is that those things in and of themselves, with anyone, especially with older adults, may not necessarily bring a better quality of life, or are things that people are invested in. What people are invested in are things like building a better life, being a better partner, parent, having social relationships, having a home to call their own, being engaged in love, intimacy, sex, having a spiritual connection, spending time with friends and families, and having financial security and what that looks like. And what research says, that if we help people engage in things on the right, you're more likely to get the things on the left. The things on the right are things that anyone, and especially older adults, concerning about having a life worth living, being a better partner, family member, engaging in love, intimacy, sex, engaging in spiritual connections are things that are more likely to connect with them versus the things on the left. And if you engage with them on things on the right, you may get, and you're more likely to get the things on the left. Next slide, please.
So thank you, Clinton. That was really, really helpful. And I was wondering if I could invite Liz to share a little bit about this campaign that the Coalition and NIAPRS have going. And even before that, I wanted to mention something I forgot. And that is that Michelle Zechner has done a two-part series in supporting older adults for the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. She offered that last summer. And so those were some of the insight and wisdom that she brought to the first segment. This second segment is by the Coalition for Behavioral Health, and Liz Breier and Clinton Green are presenting from the Coalition. And the Coalition is partnering with NIAPRS on an exciting challenge that I wanted to give Liz an opportunity to mention and for us to participate in throughout this webinar as we go forward. Liz?
Sure, great. Thanks, Rita, and thanks to everyone for allowing me to be a part of this webinar. As Rita said, my name is Liz Breier. I am one of the training and implementation specialists for the Coalition for Behavioral Health. Those of you who are New York City stationed are maybe familiar with us. We serve the behavioral health community by providing policy and advocacy and training and technical assistance to more than 100 community-based behavioral health providers, of which, of course, peer providers are considered a part of. So we have a collaborative effort that we're currently engaged in that came out of what is happening with COVID-19 and the need for, some folks are calling it social distancing. I'm kind of leaning towards physical distancing because I believe connection is more important than ever in this current time. But this is a collaborative effort between the Coalition and between NIAPRS. Those of you in New York know it as NIAPRS, the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services, and it's called the Strive for 5 Challenge. It is a New York-based effort, but it is applicable to any place in the world, I believe. And the challenge is very simple. What 5 people can you find in your life that you will be checking in on during the next 30 days? I imagine that may or may not be extended depending on how this situation continues to unfold. But think about the many different ways that you would be able to connect with 5 people over this time period. And you can be very creative, especially if we're talking about, folks who are being considered as older adults. What does that look like? If folks are, very heavily involved with technology, that may be one option, but there are so many other ways that we can connect to folks, including, phone calls. If you're old school and in New York City, you can pick up your window and yell down to your neighbor. I've gotten a lot of postcards and letters over the last 2 weeks from folks just reaching out and connecting with good old snail mail, as we call it, emails. Really, there's no end to the creativity that we can try to use to just connect with 5 people in our life and make sure that we're providing support and friendship and just being a part of each other's lives in the meaningful way that we typically tend to do anyway as peer supporters.
Thanks so much, Liz. And again, I'm Rita Cronice, and we had talked about how we would sort of address the virus crisis that's happening right now in the context of our older adult population. And we had developed the webinar and had a number of chat questions that we had included. And as the Strive for 5 challenge came out, we thought we would invite you to the chat. We would continue to ask questions in the context of, in this time of social distancing or physical distancing, think about how you can give an example or two of how you reach out to older adults to find out what they want. How do we find people that are out there that maybe aren't connecting or aren't able to connect? And Liz gave some great examples of postcards and letters and just really engaging people, maybe not physically, but more, in ways of staying connected. So we're starting to ask the chat question for those of you who are able to reach the chat. Just give an example or two of, Clinton had given ideas about what providers typically want, but what is it that people themselves really want, and what do older adults in particular really want, and put it in the context of these times, and how do we reach out to people to do that? So I just encourage everybody to find the chat and start writing your ideas of an example or two of what older adults want, and you can do that while we continue with the presentation. So I'm going to invite Clinton to come back on and we'll move forward, but continue to add to that chat as we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. So one of the ways to help anyone, and especially older adults, to think about things that they want or what they want their lives to look like is to help them focus on strengths. Older adults, and we'll talk about transitions, I think, in the next webinar, have gone through lots of transitions and losses. And it might be challenging for them and for us as providers to look at their strengths. So how do we go back and focus on what are strengths? How do we help them focus on what their strengths are and things that are valuable to them? What matters to them? What are their current interests? What are their current abilities? What are their life stories? And what's their legacy work? We as providers, and especially as peer providers, can help older adults to discover, and probably more importantly, rediscover their strengths and values. Next slide. And these strengths can come in many different categories. Some of these are intuitive to us, and some of them may not be. So our personal attributes, or their personal attributes, honesty, caring, hopefulness, and being hardworking and having a good work ethic. Other talents and strengths, being good at math, being a tech wizard, music, being good at engaging with people, being able to play an instrument, environmental strengths, which I don't think we necessarily always pay or give as much credence to as we could. Having a safe home, having a dog, having a pet, having natural supports who are truly supportive, as well as the other interests and aspirations, like to watch TV, spend time with family, engages in reading. All these things can potentially be leveraged against a lot of the challenges, especially mental health challenges, that some of the older adults that we support may be facing. And it's just helping them to leverage those strengths to mitigate some of the barriers and things that they're facing currently. Next slide, please. Other things that can be considered strengths, a clear sense of self, which I am going to add and say clear sense of purpose. I'm going to give you guys some background information. One of the things we talked about earlier, this work group, was that goals and what does that look like for an older adult? And kind of what we came up with, I believe, and what we kind of settled on is it's not necessarily a goal or a treatment goal, but more of sense of purpose, and kind of what does that mean for the older adults that we're supporting. Establishing coping strategies for whatever that individual is facing, and resilience in managing conditions. And I think, again, going back to strengths, the resilience piece and helping reaffirm that the folks that we have supported, the older adult population, have gotten there despite many challenges, and are resilient. And we need to reaffirm that resilience and build upon those strengths. A decrease in positive symptoms, an interest in achieving recovery, and again, recovery in what it looks like for that individual, not a treatment goal, not a treatment plan goal per se, but what does recovery look like for that individual in whatever sense, and kind of reaffirming and supporting that. And more importantly, supporting their desire for improved physical well-being. It's part of it, but as my colleague Michelle said earlier, wellness is more than just one dimension. Wellness is multiple dimensions, and supporting everyone's effort to be well in many dimensions, and helping them to achieve that, I think is very important. Next slide, please. So how do we focus on strengths? You can ask questions like, tell me about the important places and things in your life, and having folks reconnect back to those, asking them what they're good at, asking individuals about what activities that either give them a sense of accomplishment or used to give them a sense of accomplishment, and asking about some of the things that they are really proud of. Next slide. Asking people what matters to them, what changes do they want to make, and ways to do that are, there are a couple of ways to do that. One is to do something called a values elicitation, which is essentially helping folks to reconnect or asking them about what values are important to them and how those values are represented in their everyday life. Motivational interviewing, which is simply a way of having a conversation with an individual to help them figure out kind of where they are and where they want to be, and have them look at how they want to get there if they want to get there. And another thing, which my colleague will talk about in a little bit, which is called shared decision making, which is, again, is a very collaborative method of having a conversation with an individual about making medical decisions and just decisions in general that are important to their life, and again, what they want their recovery to look like.
So this is Rita, I'm back. So again, we're going to put this chat question in the context of, the current virus crisis. And striving for 5, reaching out to 5 people we know. How can we do that? And can we give an example or two of how you might approach, these 5 people that you're thinking about, and how you might help them to focus on their own strengths during this time, because that can get lost in the shuffle of everything that's happening. So the chat question for all of you at this point is, can you give an example or two of how you might help? And in this case, let's put it in the context of reaching out to 5 people 5, it doesn't have to be older adults, but that's sort of where we're focusing this effort. Help 5 people focus on their strengths. And so continue to have the chat while we go on with the conversation. And I think Clinton has one more slide that we're gonna have him look at. So I'm gonna turn off my camera and return to Clinton.
Thanks, Rita. So I spoke a little bit earlier about the elicitation exercises, and I saw there were some other questions in there that I think um, we may get to a little bit later. But the elicitation exercise is a list of values that obviously are not exhaustive. But you would get people to look at this list and select 10 things that are important to them. And out of that 10, they would then select the 5 that are the most important, and rank them from the most important to the least important. And what that does, or what that can help folks do, is look at kind of where they are in their life currently and kind of what is important to them and what they want their life to look like, and help folks who may be ambivalent about kind of what they want their life to look like, or unsure about kind of where they are, to help solidify some of that. And I've found that to be a great tool, not just with older adults. And with older adults, I think it's really important as well. Again, we'll talk about transitions and loss in the next webinar, but for individuals who may have lost a lot, to reconnect to purpose and reconnect to what's important, this could be a very, very valuable tool in helping them do so.
Good afternoon. Abdul Raouf joining the chat.
Could you stay on mute, please? Thank you. And we're going to turn your camera off as well, because we're just focusing on the presenters at this time. Thank you for joining, and we're glad you're here.
Another exercise which I found, at least for me, helpful was, again, getting back to values, was the this or that exercise, where an individual would, between these two things, choose one or the other, and then kind of look at their, and do it very quickly. It's not, you look at the two items, you circle one really quickly, the one that resonates the most, and then you go on. And what you look at when you're done, and it's more than just these 5, is kind of looking at, is there a pattern? What did you feel was most valuable, and how does that resonate with you currently? Is that something in some place where you currently are? And again, in our current environment, I recognize it's really hard about kind of recognizing kind of where you want to be. I'm also a very firm believer that if you're not sure of kind of what your sense of purpose is, then this sense of isolation that some folks may be experiencing, and what they're recommending as far as physical distancing, can be intensified. So reconnecting to sense of self, reconnecting to sense of strength, and reconnecting to sense of purpose, I believe, is really important. I also recognize and believe that us as supporters have to be very, very, very creative in how we support people and help people achieve those things in the environment that we are currently in. Next slide. So motivational interviewing, some of you have heard of this before. Again, for me, it's just a way to have a conversation. It's not and should not be as intended as a way to engage people in services or have them go a particular way. It's intended to have folks look at what they have and kind of where they want to go. And the way you do that is through asking open-ended questions, providing affirmations for individuals, using reflective listening techniques, and then more importantly for me is providing summary reflections in order to make sure that what we believe we heard from the individual, as well as helping the individual know that we've heard them. Next slide. So now I think I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Liz Breier, who's going to pick it up from here with this shared decision.
Thanks, Clinton. Hi, everyone again. So when I think about what are some things that we can add into our toolbox, into the techniques that we may use to support individuals across the spectrum, but specifically today around folks who are considered older adults, shared decision-making is a technique that kind of emerged out of medicine in general. Really focused on, I think, to Clinton's point earlier about how there seems to be a disconnect often between what physicians think the individuals that they're working with want and what the individual themselves actually wants. There is some research done in reference to breast cancer and choices that women were making around, things such as treatment options and whether or not they wanted to keep the breast, and things that were surprisingly really showed the disconnect between what people feel is important and relevant to them and what physicians assumed somebody would want. So it's really just a collaborative process that allows individuals and their care teams, in this case specifically, I'm referring to peer supporters, to make treatment and service decisions together, taking into account the best scientific evidence as well as the individual's values and preferences. So we're thinking about folks right now who are aging and have been aging in a system that traditionally has not really focused as much on what people wanted, more focused on what the treatment team felt was appropriate and what was considered to be a best practice. And so there was not historically a lot of room for individual values and preferences. And not surprisingly, we don't see as many folks sticking to whatever those plans were that were made for them because it wasn't theirs. Their plan, it didn't resonate with them. Shared decision-making is one way to kind of bridge that gap and bring in that autonomy and that self-determination around one's own sense of being, their wellness, and however they want to take that. Next slide, please. Next slide, Rita. So it kind of works on the belief that there are two experts in the room. Treatment and services are done with people and not to people. That is a quote from someone who's participated within shared decision making. So on the one side, you may have that practitioner. Again, this is coming out of medicine, although those of you familiar with Dr. Pat Deegan and the Recovery Library and the work she's done over the years, she's really expanded on this a lot in terms of the behavioral health system. But on the one side, you have the practitioner. So they do bring the level of expertise that they have in relation to illness and treatment options, or however you frame it. I'm someone who identifies as a peer, so I tend to not go down the illness route. But however the individual is framing it, they're shifting their role, though, from being the expert who is telling you what to do to more of a consultant, someone who's able to provide information so that the individual themselves can really make the best decision for themselves. When I think of myself and my own health issues and my own aging, if I'm not involved in that process, if it's not informed decision-making as I see it, I'm not invested in it and I want no part of it. This really helps bridge that gap in terms of people are choosing to participate in that process. So there is some recognition that you do need some level of health information to be given to you in order to be able to make the best decision. But then what other factors need to be considered in that equation? What personal values? What treatment preferences? Does that person have any goals? When we're talking about issues around aging, I think of my grandmother. She's about to be 90 next week. Even at that stage in her life, if she's not actively involved and if her values and her preferences are not being considered in that, she's not very invested in it. So I think there's no end to when folks' autonomy and their need for self-determination need to be respected. Next slide, please. So this can be applied to all situations, for example, where there may be competing options and someone needs some assistance in trying to navigate through and prioritize what is going to be the thing that they look at first and foremost. It is a style of communication. There are some decision aids that are available out there that can be used with someone to help them kind of sort through that process. And again, it's about the information. So in this case, because of the types of trainings we do at the coalition, it's around the mental health issues and treatment options, and then incorporating individuals' preferences, goals, and cultural values and beliefs. But you could really kind of move this to any type of decision. The assumption is that we only make decisions around medical issues, but really we make, even in this system, there are choices and decisions that are made about just about anything in life. So it really is applicable to any and all decisions that could be made. Next slide. So there's 4 reasons that the research is showing why this is a good technique and tool to use. First, because as I just mentioned, decisions about treatment are not just medical decisions. People are needing to make decisions about all sorts of things in all different stages of life. It's an imperative at this point to be able to give folks choice and voice and self-determination. We really want to try to avoid that preference misdiagnosis. We don't really benefit from experts telling us what to do and us not being involved in that process. And then how do you really come across informed consent? How can folks have all the information that they need to be able to make the best decisions for themselves and what will work for them? That makes sense. Next slide, please. And there's evidence to support this. I hesitate even to really elaborate too much on this, but if you engage folks in what they want, you will by default see folks being more actively engaged in their care in whatever way they're choosing to engage with it in. You can see more folks recognizing and accomplishing goals and outcomes, but that would not be the way that I would choose to focus on this. More importantly for me is you'd see less decision regret. The more folks are involved in what matters to them, the less likely they are to have second thoughts about whatever that is, because it's their choice to make it. And then folks can have more knowledge about what might be some risks that they may be looking at based on whatever that option is. Next slide, please. This is my favorite, actually, that I'd like to talk about. So I was lucky enough to take this training a few years back, Intentional Peer Support, which was developed by Sherry Mead. Just a quote from her. This is really more where my heart is and what resonates with me in terms of, as peer support in mental health proliferates, we must be mindful of our intention, which is really social change. I mean, that is what was the impetus behind what we're now calling peer support. It is not about developing more effective services, but about creating dialogues that have influence on all of us, of our understandings, our conversations, and our relationships. If you have not been able to take this training, I highly recommend it. It was very life-changing for me to be able to take it, but it's really about the mutuality between individuals, between people. Next slide, please. And it really involves what is being called 4 tasks, which is building on that connection between individuals, exploring different worldviews and recognizing and really acknowledging and honoring that people will have and can have different worldviews. And that's a beautiful thing and a part of the process. About that mutuality, about evening out as much as possible power differentials. So if you're working as someone as a peer supporter, even in that role, you may have some level of power. And this is about really trying to minimize that as much as possible and just coming from that place of not knowing, because it's not really about what we're trying to eliminate out of an individual's lives, but what are we trying to build together? What is that creation? What are we co-creating together as 2 people in a mutual relationship that is beneficial? And it's about what we're moving towards, not what we're taking away from people, which is really very different from the way that this mental health system is currently set up. So these relationships in this model, it's really viewed as a partnership. Both parties are inspired and learn and grow. It isn't one-sided where you're the passive recipient and I'm just going to be giving you things that you're tasked with growing and learning from. This is about both of us in the exchange together. It doesn't start with the assumption of a problem, which I love. And I think in relation to what we're talking about today, that makes a lot of sense. We're not problems to be fixed. Just take that off the table right away. And it really is a trauma-informed way, trauma-responsive way, I would even say, on interacting with the people that we're supporting. And then finally, I think it looks at accountability in terms of mutuality as well. So again, it's not about that passiveness of you are the service recipient and I am the provider and you need to do what I say, but it is completely about our relationship and what we're learning from each other and how we grow from that exchange. So it's a fantastic, fantastic tool, model, philosophy, set of values, pretty much any way that you want to define this. This is a wonderful, wonderful way to approach supporting older adults. Next slide. I think I might be done.
So thank you so much, Liz. That was a great summary of both shared decision-making and intentional peer support. And I echo, intentional peer support is one of those foundational trainings that if you haven't had a chance to take it, I strongly urge you to take, because it just really forms the basis for relationships that work. So I'm going to ask again, for those of you that are able to chat, give an example or two of how you might support older adults in making their own choices. So we've been talking a little bit about shared decision making and a little bit about mutuality and being intentional in the ways that we provide peer support. So if you can give a couple of examples, then we'll let the chat go in the background while we move forward with the webinar. And I'm going developed this webinar. We had thought we were going to do a piece on the arts. Deb and Gayle have prepared, Deb and Bluebird have prepared a course for the Academy of Peer Services called Transforming Lives with the Arts. So we were planning on doing a lot on that, but what's happened today is kind of one of those things that happens whenever real life gets in the way of your plans. You know, how you make plans, but something else happens. Of course, the virus has happened. And we had some conversations this morning about Bluebird and Deb, example of what support looks like. So I'm going to just quickly run through the slides here that we had originally planned. We're not going to do those, but you'll have them in the presentation handout that you'll get later on. Bluebird has this wonderful quote that art is a guarantee of sanity, a human way of self-actualizing, rather than pathologizing the potential of one's life. I'm going to run through the slides very quickly, and then I'm going to introduce them at the point where we would have introduced the course. So here, Bluebird talks a little bit about creativity for older adults. She has this wonderful piece of art by Tom Hill. And then talking about creative communication, being a person, not a title, and doing things like dressing creatively as you go through providing support for others. Again, these will be in a handout that you'll get later, but for time's sake, I want to try to get to where Gayle and where Bluebird and Deb will talk more. There's a lot here about finding our gifts and ways of remembering good times and avoiding this what did you do, and remembering that everybody has talent. I'll actually read through these. Acceptance, goal setting is different when you're an older adult, finding talents from the past and reviving those. Telling stories, sharing photographs, remembering good times. Avoiding the what did you do. Everybody has talent, but it's often forgotten. Stories for listening and illustrating loneliness, frustrating times in isolation, how do we get people out of themselves, creating new families and new settings. So those were some of the ideas that she was going to share. I'll ask a chat question. What are some ways that we as supporters can help people to use creative expression in the arts to help older adults find their gifts? There are things like the pillowcases of recovery where you can reclaim some of your dreams. There are things like having, sessions where you really just explore. Now, of course, we can't do this in the time of social distancing, but how could we engage people in these kinds of creative pursuits? And these were just some examples that Bluebird was going to share. But mainly talking about art as a vehicle for traumatic growth. I love the quote, "Only those who risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go." And the plan was to really explore the idea of finding the gifts of older adults from the memories, from acceptance of others, from reviving forgotten talents here and now. Work history is not so important, equalizing the playing field and being family-centered. And many of these things you will find in the course that Gayle Bluebird and Deb Trueheart put together in our online course for the Academy of Peer Services called Transforming Lives with the Arts. At this point, however, what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen, and hopefully we've got Deb. I'm going to stop sharing my camera too. We have Deb and Gayle able to talk to each other. If you're on camera and you can turn off your camera for now so we can really just focus on them, that would be great. And if you can put your speaker view up, that will be even more helpful so you can see both of them as they have a conversation. And I'll now invite them to have that conversation.
Hi, Bluebird.
Hi, Deb. Can I just say a couple things about what happened in the last couple days? First thing I want to say is that Deb and I share the experience of being involved in our consumer, what we might call consumer survivor movement for many years. We're also very close friends. And we also share a lot in terms of some of the things that concern us, some of our family things. The last couple of days, I began to feel really disconnected, I think is one of the ways to put it. And actually was tearful, kind of not wanting to do the PowerPoint, the training. And so then Deb and I talked about our sharing, and it kind of led to, it wasn't even started this way, it really didn't start, I mean, we didn't decide on this until just a few minutes ago. But so we're going to do a little bit of a mock warm line conversation, I think is what we're going to do. And Deb will act as my peer supporter. And but I'm also hoping, I don't know how much time we have, that we can share some of the points that she and I have discussed in the last couple of days. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So, yeah, Deb, you might, you know.
Well, I know that what I experienced in the last couple of days with you, Bluebird, is that you were having growing anxiety about being, you know, whether you could really be on this call, and expressing some concern about just what was going on for you internally and externally. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, the way I explained it to Deb was, one of the things that we had talked about was that when we get older, we have things that might be considered challenges, physical challenges. For me, besides being hard of hearing, I am very confused at times. And I always say, well, I have a memory problem. Usually I'm able to kind of make fun of that. And, you know, I'm still kind of the little jolly person that walks around and in my funny little hats and things. And, you know, this is not typical of me to be completely down like this. But I do think that, and I wanted you to talk about it too, which is that despite the fact that we have our physical challenges or emotional challenges at times, that doesn't change who we are. It doesn't change how, you know, what it is that we still want to do, what our goals are. So I know that you had talked a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I have trouble with the word goals. I always have. I mean, that's not something that just because I'm an older adult, that now comes up for me. I just never have fit into that sort of model because my creativity just goes off in directions, and it's hard for me to think about goals. And I know that Bluebird, that you've been involved in the movement for a number of years, and that that you were always, I mean, you were involved in Delaware and in helping bridge people, and you just have had a lot of involvement. And now, as we age, become in that that category of older adult, things change and our abilities change. You've had some issues with being confused, and you asked me to come and help you with the curriculum, and I've had some health challenges. So those things diminish our ability to do the things that we want.
Well, I think what's true of both of us, Deb, is that we've not stopped.
Right.
And I'm
it doesn't keep us down.
We haven't stopped. And I guess at this point I want to say thank you to Rita for giving me the opportunity to do a curriculum guide manual on using the arts, which is called Transforming Lives with the Arts. And I guess for me, well, if Howie the Harp were here, some of you may remember his name, one of our early heroes, he would say, well, that's a delusion come true. And that's sort of the way I thought about it, was that all the boxes of materials that I had suddenly had a purpose, and that all of the kinds of activities we've done over the years, and Deb and I have both shared with a lot of those things, now have a place where I think they can be used. And I think the other thing I want to say is that there was mention about the wellness, that there's 8 dimensions of wellness. Well, I always kind of bristled at that, because I think there's a 9th dimension, which is creativity. And I further, in the manual that I developed, it kind of expresses the fact that creativity can be part of everything, can be part of the way we communicate with people, and how we dress, and how we approach people, and that the art may be something that you can reach people with, where another way you have not been able to reach them. It's a safe way for communication. And for me, it's, I just have tons of examples of how that's worked, and also for me. So Deb, why don't you talk a little bit about your involvement in the arts and the dance, and maybe some of the things that we've done at conferences. Yeah. And I also want to touch, I just also want to touch on the fact that Deb and I also shared, maybe it can be our next point, about disconnecting, and how it is that as we age, we don't always see the same people that we're used to seeing. But at any rate, why don't you speak to that a little bit, to your experience with the arts?
Oh, thanks, Gayle. But I really just want to say, first of all, that I'm so glad that we had the opportunity, and that you had the opportunity to do that curriculum, because for me, that was like the culmination of your whole life's work. It was like you took all those boxes of stuff and you had a place to put it. And I'm just so excited that now other people will share and see sort of how you have brought this all together. And that was really fun to be part of with you. And Gayle and I have known each other mostly through the alternatives conferences, and the what is it called, the talent show, or was it called talent show? Was it called? It's called something else.
Open mic talent show.
Open mics, that's it.
Yeah.
And often at those open mics, I would read poetry that I have a book of poetry and photography that I put together several years ago. But I really love to dance. And I think at one of the at one of the open mics, I danced some, and that was fun. It was just, you know, to a piece of music that Keb Mo, and it was just really fun to do that. and then I had some health challenges, and Bluebird and I were talking yesterday about the fact that at one of the conferences in Maryland, we were walking along the boardwalk, and I'd been on oxygen for a while, and we came across a street performer who was, you know, playing some music, and I just couldn't not dance. So even though here I was lugging some oxygen, I took it off and I danced, because you can't keep that out of you. You know, even as we age and even as we are compromised, the things that are life enhancing for us, that give us life, that give us meaning, that give us purpose, those don't get shut off. And so when I heard music, I had to dance.
That's such a beautiful memory, and I think that's another thing about being an older adult. I have to say, the term older adult, the first thing when I told Deb about this webinar and the word older adult, and she kind of bristled on that. And not only that, I called somebody also that had been part of our early movement, and when she learned that it was about older adults, she said, no, that's just, I don't relate to that term. And I don't have a problem with it, but I think what is meant by that is that we don't like to be labeled, and it's another form of label. And it's also an experience with that label where we're kind of categorized and stereotyped. I think we use that word, Deb. And it also sometimes means that we lose control, that we're treated like children. Or that, and I think the first words that you said, Deb, when we talked about this, I'm trying to see here where they are, was voice, choice, and independence and acceptance. And I think that those things are things that we've learned in peer support. We know those things. We know how to give somebody else support because we've been there. But that we cherish the fact that no matter what age we are, that we want to be independent, and we want to be autonomous, and we want to make our own choices. Let me say something else too. I have the title that I gave to Rita, and it's called one of my titles, one of my many titles over the years. The latest one is The Underground Rebel. And and a friend of mine here, I live in a senior high-rise. That's another thing. I never thought I would go to a senior high-rise and live in a, kind of place where old people live, but it turned out it's just a tremendous experience for me, and that my role here really has never changed. I'm still the one who can be counted on to challenge things, can be counted on to be on the council and to come up with the creative ideas. And so my close friend, she also is the underground rebel. Nothing's been said yet about isolation and loneliness. And I was trying to think, well, why have I been crying for the last few days? And one of the reasons is the fact that we have a 6 feet. I know it just sounds stupid. I know why we have all these, regulations right now, and I know what they are and why they are. But my whole life, or my whole career, I talked about the need for people to be touched, and I did trainings on that, and comfort, and comfort rooms. And I just see that, our closeness is being challenged, our ability to be close. And by saying that, I will also say, though, that the arts have become very important. You can see it on TV and in every single commentary that comes on. There's the approach of the arts and how people are using it and how people are singing in groups, but you see them individually. It's kind of very creative. So you also talked about your idea about being an older adult, and you moved to Florida, and how it is that you wanted to live. Deb, I thought that was so, you had a nice, kind of example image that I thought was very interesting.
Well, I had bought a house in New Hampshire, and after about 5 years of ice storms and electricity, I said, who thought this was a good idea? But the idea of moving to Florida was, oh my God, I'm not going to go there where all those old people are, because I'm not going to be one of those people playing shuffleboard. And it's very clear that in my own mind, I have stereotypes about what the older adult is. And I didn't want to be that. I mean, I've always been in my own mind, and I think probably everybody on this call probably can identify themselves as being a rebel. And I sort of like being that, having that sort of distinction, and that's how I think about myself. So I don't want to be one of the crowd. So I don't want to be one that's labeled in any way that separates, because often our labels separate us. So even a label of the older adult separates us. And I am aware that when I just get involved in doing my life, just living my life, and I've actually, gotten better since I've been here, and since I have an amazing group of friends, and my life is so much easier here than it was in New England. And I love my life. And but I do lose my train of thought. That does happen. I don't want to be lumped into any category. And I know what I was going to say. When I'm just involved in doing my life, I don't think of myself as an old person, and I still look at other people like, oh, they're old, but I'm not there yet. And I don't really, like when you're just living your life, you're 40 or you're 13 until you look in the mirror and you see that there's an old person looking back at you. And so I think it's important to know that inside we're all the same. We don't think of ourselves in that way. And of course, health has a lot to do with it. If you're, the more healthy you are, the more ability you have to sort of be in that mindset.
I wanted to jump in and say thank you to both of you. This has been just amazing and wonderful. If you haven't already had a chance to take a look at this course, this amazing course that Bluebird and Deb put together, it's well worth the time. And there's another course that we have too on self-care, which are both really amazing courses for the times that we're in. And so I just also wanted to say a real big thank you, if I can get the slides to advance. Hello. To our underground creativity rebel and her alternate ego, Henrietta. So that's Gayle Bluebird, and that's how to contact her. And with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce our next presenter and our last presenter, Shanti Vani. Shanti, and you're on? Okay, great.
Okay, yeah. Should I turn on my video thing or?
You're on.
It doesn't matter. Okay. Okay, let me set my little timer here. This has been absolutely amazing. I've learned so much from all of you, and I'm thrilled to be here. It's my first ever webinar presenting, and so I'm coming in as an end-of-life doula, and so many of the things that have been shared today have impacted my life personally. I'm 69, so I'm now an elder. I've been an elder for a while. I've experienced a lot of loss and found my strength through that. The photos in my presentation here are all photos that I took. The gladiolus you see, I grew from a bulb, and I love the natural world and letting letting the world give me gifts, which flowers are, and they just come up, and it's amazing, and they come up every year. So anyway, in 2018, my mother died, and I had taken care of her along with my daughter primarily for we lived with her for 2.5 years, but I took care of her for quite a few years as she was losing her memory. She would put cat litter in the cat food bowl. She would take the remote and think it was the telephone. She would put 2 shoes on 1 foot. She would drive until her neurologist interviewed her and said, you're not going to drive anymore. So I said, okay, that was the last driving. And so I learned a lot about the dying process. And while she was living with Alzheimer's, we just never knew, when's it going to happen? How's it going to happen? It was such a mystery. So anyway, that's how I came to be an end-of-life doula, along with 7 deaths in the family in 7 years, from 2013 to 2018. All kinds of deaths: babies, sister, daughter, mother, father, other deaths. So death is a hard topic, but end-of-life doulas don't just deal in death, we deal in life as we are approaching death. So anyway, the topic today for me is the legacy project. And your legacy is kind of like who you are, what's important to you, what do you love, what photos, we share photos, we look at poems, stories, anything. Some people say, well, I don't really have a legacy, I'm nobody, I don't do anything, I'm just, but no, maybe you grow flowers, maybe you love to be at the river, maybe you cook food. It really hasn't much to do with some kind of JFK or Martin Luther King. You don't have to be a great famous person to have a legacy. Okay, next slide. Ready?
It's coming.
Okay, gotcha. So this is my father, and my niece's 2 boys. He's World War II vet, born in 1922, and he has a legacy. He was very proud of a lot of things that he did. In the early days, my dad was pretty rough to get along with, very stubborn and difficult to me, challenging. But in his older years, he became very soft and loving, and he wrote a beautiful letter to me asking forgiveness, acknowledging the things that he had missed. And so anyway, that's Dad. Let's go next slide. So, and there's Mom. She loved music. That was her longtime friend. They looked at their hands together, and I thought that was such a powerful picture of that. The hands, both of them have the veins bulging. They're in their 80s and 90s. They have so much history in those hands. So you don't have to be rich or famous. You don't have to be whatever, amazing. Every person, every individual has a legacy. Mom loved music. Even with her dementia, she would get to her piano, and that was her there. We're all artistic, and art doesn't have a certain form. Art is our expression of ourself and what we love. Next slide. Okay, so this is a big slide. Legacy projects. Okay, they give form and meaning to our lives. They can give us a sense of completion and purpose. As a person is approaching their end of life, it's important to bring out the old memories, the old pictures. Use your technology to put those together on some kind of a presentation. Pull stuff out of the closet. I keep a lot of stuff. So now that I'm at home a lot right now, I'm going to be going through that stuff and putting it in order. Handmade greeting cards. Somebody had mentioned writing an actual handwritten note. I keep all my cards. There's just like 2 boxes full of them over my life, and those are important, and they're touchable and memorable, and tell somebody that you love them, you know. Recipes. Anyway, you guys can see all of these. Writing your own obituary is a very interesting exercise. You have to really think about what your life was, and so okay, next slide. Okay, so my dad, I took a video of him, and I wasn't able to show it on this presentation, but I think it should be in the resource list. And I videotaped him one day, and I said, you know, I hadn't even done legacy work, but I said, hey, Dad, what do you want your legacy to be? And he said, I think my legacy would be, or should be, having a chance to speak the truth as I say it and as I see it, and having that experience. I hope that I am straightforward and honest. I try for it not to be an unpleasant experience, saying things that would offend people or hurt people. That I would not want to do. And this is the wisdom of his older years. In his younger years, he did very clumsy things. But as we age, the beauty of it is that we see that we get to slow down and relax and just be kinder because we're not so busy. Next. And Mom. Now, Mom had Alzheimer's, as I said. Hopefully the video of this setting with her cat is available to you. She was just such a kind, sweet, gentle person. And we're going to go to the next slide. This shows the multi-generational aspect, how important it is for like a 7 or 8-year-old child to be with a 90-something person. They're just 2 babes, you know, just 2 people here. Loving and caring for each other. What Mom had to offer that child was as important as what she could do for Mom. So I found her notes. She said, on the path, one day at a time, do no harm. Take only that which is freely given. Speak truthfully and helpfully. Use my energy wisely. Keep my mind clear. And that's pretty much like the commandments, I think. Basic stuff. So the pictures in my presentation here are all ones that I've taken of family. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so again, when you save this and get the recording, you can kind of use this. But now mastermind groups have been going on, and I forget the guy who wrote the book, but it's the idea here is that you create a group around yourself of people who are deeply ethical and connected and on the same page. And you gather them, in this case, every week. Since we're not able to meet in person right now, we will do a Zoom meeting or something like that every week. And we create kind of a support group for our area of expertise or our interests or what's important to us. It might be quilters, it might be healthcare workers, who knows. But as an end-of-life doula, I would consider people who, funeral directors, elder law attorney, senior care, photographer. The photography and the videography is all about legacy work. Threshold choir, you may not have heard of that, but that is where people sing to a person who is dying. And so we provide these kinds of support to each other, and we become important people to each other. So the commitment, next slide. The commitment on these meetings is that you're really going to show up and you're not going to be absent. It's like if you were going to work, you know, you just aren't a no-show. You bring something to the group related to the services that you offer. It could be a website design or a concern or something wonderful that happened. And at the end of the meeting, you give each other undivided listening for a certain amount of time. And at the end of the meeting, you kind of reassess and look towards what you can do in the coming week. I suggest weekly at this time, especially as you're building your group. So this is kind of fits into the Strive for 5 challenge. And this picture was my husband's family, him on the left, on the right, and his nieces and nephews playing. And I thought that's a great, it's a real photograph of them coinciding. All right, next. Okay, so Inelda is the group that trained me in the end of life doula training. They are incredible, and you can go to their website, inelda.org, and you can find out a whole lot of stuff about it. And I was, as of yesterday, I was a respiratory therapist, but my job ended yesterday. That's another story. I'm glad to be moving on. And the other point about me is that I've been working on the mask, the face mask project. And a lot of people are making face masks at home since we have time on our hands. And
so Shanti, can you explain that a little more, what the face mask is? Because they might not get a picture of it's the medical masks that people.
Oh, yes. Now, Gainesville has a Facebook page, and it's face masks for COVID or something like that. But what we're doing is we're getting hospitals to give us their recycled material coming out of the OR. They have a special kind of material called something H600, and it's non-permeable, but you can make a mask out of it. So the hospitals give us their reusable materials, and we sew the masks for the hospital workers. And God knows everybody needs those. So it's real exciting, and it gives us something to do. There's also just look it up. You'll find them online, the articles about it.
And there's also a video from one of the news channels in Gainesville that showed you actually making the masks, which I thought was fascinating.
Right, right. And the ones that I was on that, it was the cloth masks. There's other videos about the ones that are more safety oriented, that would be for the healthcare workers. The cloth masks are for people in general, but it's debatable, but I figure something's better than nothing. And I'd be happy to share. My email address is there. I'd be happy to share with people what I'm doing with masks and what there is going on. Thank you.
And so our last chat question is, as a supporter, how much you approach conversations about legacy work. And what I'd like to do is invite you to respond to, you all got information about our Academy of Peer Services virtual learning community. The email address is academy.virtual.community@gmail.com. And you can write to me. I'll pose the questions. I'll stay in touch with the group. I know we've run out of time, but what I did want to do is offer, there is a program that we will be featuring in a future webinar called Service Program for Older People. We've been wanting to get them on as one of the faces and places of peer support, and we will be doing that in the near future. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Richard and the others who are at that program. They're doing some amazing work, so that's another way of older folks who are in New York City to get connected. And then the contact information for this group. Here are Michelle, Clinton, Liz, Bluebird, and Shanti's email addresses. And again, you can always reach out to me and I can put you in touch with them, or we can collect a list of questions or comments. I will sort of look at the chat and I'll try to put together information from the chat. That will go out to those of you who are registered. We will, when the recording is available, and when we'll provide that in the PowerPoint presentation, as well as a resource list that they've been referencing throughout the webinar. There's a reference list that we put together, and I'm going to add to that a few new things that came up during the session. So those should be coming out to you within the week. So watch for that coming from us. And again, the references and recording will be available shortly for all of you who registered. I just want to say real thank you to Michelle, to Clinton and Liz, to Bluebird and Debbie and Shanti, and to Richard, and another really big thank you to Regina Schoen, who has been our partner in crime for so many of these webinars. The Office of Mental Health has been really tremendous. They, as you can imagine, are very, very busy right now, so we ended up recording this on our own Zoom platform. But when we get back to a more normal, if there ever will be another normal time, we'll be returning to the WebEx platform that Office of Mental Health has provided, which offers a lot more access to people around the state. And I really also wanted to say a really big thank you to all of you who tuned in today. Again, thank you. I'm Rita Crumbles, and I haven't been on camera this whole time that I've been talking, which I just realized. So thank you very much for joining, and we'll be in touch. I will be sending out an evaluation of this that you can give us any thoughts that you have that you would like to share with us about the presentation. Anything that you'd like to say specifically to any of the presenters, I will share. And thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.